I'm going to say good afternoon because I believe we are now live on air. I can't see if anybody from an audience has joined. So if you are on and you can hear us, there should be a chat on the screen. If somebody that we may know is listening can type in a message to the chat to tell us that you are all there and good and present, that would be really helpful, given that this is our first ever LinkedIn Live as Oakland. So I'm going to keep going on the assumption that there are people out there listening and it's not just the four of us, which is fine if it is. But yes, hopefully you at home can hear us loud and clear. So yeah, good afternoon. This is Oakland's first ever LinkedIn Live. We thought it was a great way of being able to bring together a team of us that have experienced Microsoft Ignite over the last month to share our thoughts, our feelings, our perspectives really on what Microsoft had to say and what it means to you, hopefully, back at home in terms of your data journeys, your data transformations. So we attended that back in November and we thought what better way to share that experience. So today, joining me, and I'm Andy Crossley, the CTO of Oakland. I have three of Oakland's finest. So, guys, if I can hand over to you as our technical experts today, if you could just introduce yourselves to the audience.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Rajan. So I'm a solutions architect here at Oakland, specializing in the Microsoft data stack. I'll pass it over to Chris.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a principal Azure architect at Oakland. I am also our Microsoft Alliances lead. Mike?
Hey, how you doing? Do you know, I hope everybody's really, really well. It's great to see so many people in the chat. I'm going to do some of the normal live stream things of going, hey, it's brilliant to see you guys in the chat. Thank you so much, Nathan. And we've got a couple of anonymous people in there as well. My name's Mike. I am the principal AI engineer for Oakland. I've been building out stuff with generative AI for about 18 months now, which has been a fantastic journey. And the three of us, Chris, Rajan, and I, were glued maybe to the screens for Ignite a couple of weeks ago when it happens, which is an unfortunate thing to be in the United Kingdom because obviously the conference is not in this country and is kind of shifted in terms of time, which meant that Rajan, Chris and I had to do a day's work and then disappointingly stay up all night and watch things about Microsoft. However, Mr. Crossley, Andy, was actually there. So in the slickest transition, we're going to pass over to him to talk about what it was like to actually be in the room with Microsoft.
Yes. So I would say I did have late nights as well, just to be clear on that. So perhaps not quite as stressful as yours trying to dial into calls that were happening that I was watching live. But yeah, I was fortunate enough to be invited by our Softcat colleagues to attend with them to go to Microsoft Ignite for the first time. And whilst not a first timer to San Francisco, but a first timer to an event of that scale was sort of mind boggling. So for any of you who have not had the opportunity, it's all set in one massive area and 20,000 people near enough descend on San Francisco to go to this event and largely just follow around like a big herd of sheep going from conference center to conference center to watch all things Microsoft. One of the really interesting things that I probably learned, and I think this is a bit of a like where things have come from versus where we are now in the world of data and tech. So I had this picture in my mind that I was going to go to the keynote. We were going to see a Steve Ballmer-esque executive bouncing along the stage, sort of declaring the latest and greatest. We've all seen those videos. We've all come to sort of believe that's how the tech giants do things, and actually, it's much not like that at all. Actually, and not that that's a bad thing. It was much more sedate and a bit less surreal, probably. But a reflection that I had was that technology innovation, I think, just seems to have sped up so much, particularly over the last 18 months, as Mike talked about, sort of doing some of the agentic stuff that we've done over that period. But the sort of release of features, capabilities, updates, tooling is just at such a rapid pace, actually arriving at Ignite. There wasn't really the opportunity for a grand reveal, a big new thing, because it's just happening all the time. So interestingly, I think it was more, for me, the release of, or the official launch of, this frontier firm concept that was more interesting, as opposed to all the building blocks that sort of sat underneath that, which we will come on to and talk a bit more. But that was probably the bit I think I overheard most when we were walking around there physically, in terms of conversations around people of trying to get their head around what the frontier firm concept meant for them, or meant for their customers, or meant for their partners. But it really did capture the imagination, I think, of people. And very quickly, people were trying to get their head around, what does that mean in reality? What does that mean in our real world? How does that translate to a success story or a customer scenario? And I think whether people out there, people listening at home, you're a fan of the Microsoft stack or not, attending an event like that, driven by one of the tech giants, certainly I think sets a tone largely for the rest of the market. They are going to lead the way, whether it's the actual physical technology you end up using out there back in your organization, doesn't really matter. The concept of a frontier firm, I think, is a sign of the times. It's a sign of where organizations, the tech companies, will be trying to take people. And whilst the term might be questionable, that's probably one for another day. The concept, I think, is absolutely in line with what we're seeing organizations try to adopt and seek towards in terms of this AI-driven future. Now, what that actually means in reality, I think, is very much down to each organization, and each organization will have their own version of that frontier firm journey. I guess what we're here to talk about and share with everybody who's listening is our interpretation of that, and our interpretation of how all the features and tools that were presented during the week can be used, can be taken advantage of, what it actually really means for you in your organizations, as opposed to the sort of the brochure version. So the other thing is that because of the scale, whilst it was great to be in there in person, I on my own just simply couldn't cover the ground and sort of give it enough respect in terms of what was being said, by who, about what. The amount of talks, sessions, demos, etc., was mind-boggling. So back to our trio of experts. That's why these guys were so important in terms of being able to cover the rest of the event through the live streams and stuff, to be able to, I guess, combine my 82,000 steps, I think I did while I was there, with your sleepless nights, to be able to pull together a much more, hopefully, coherent and thorough review of what it actually means to be a frontier firm, and what are the things on the shelf you can go and grab hold of, and some take advantage of today, I would anticipate, to achieve that dream that Microsoft sort of fired off in San Francisco. So I guess just before we get into the tech, I've given you my sort of perception of what the event was like, touched on briefly the frontier firm concept. But guys, what was your take on that? It's a sort of new concept from Microsoft, but there was murmurs of it and some releases of it pre-event in terms of this frontier firm thing. What was your take, Chris?
Yes, if I jump in first. So my take on it really was, this is where Microsoft see their ideal customer going, right? So we've embraced AI. That's given us that competitive advantage. So we've got both human agents, AI agents, all working together to give us a competitive advantage, whether that's in our sector or against other people. The key thing here for me, though, is governance. So what was announced over the last couple of weeks at Ignite was around, we've got governance and we've got security baked into these frontier firms, which is really, really important. And why is that important? Because this prediction of 1.3 billion agents that are going to be released globally by 2028. Without governance, without security, how do we control that? How do we stop that shadow IT land turning into just shadow IT agents? Rajan, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think obviously, is a big theme of the Ignite conference, but I think one of my key takeaways is how does it impact, I guess, day-to-day business processes. I remember in one of the initial keynotes, one of the things that resonated with me, I guess, quite heavily was how do we use like the AI and the agents to remove some of those repetitive or mundane tasks that we experience on a day-to-day basis and allow us to focus on the stuff that we're good at, the things that we enjoy the most. I think that's where some of the ideas or the concepts of the frontier firm come in. And like Microsoft released, they released like lots of, I guess, information and guidance around what they believe the frontier firm is. It's almost like a maturity of a tiering step. How do agents get embedded or almost become, part of the lifeblood within the organization, but still remaining with that human-centric, I guess, design when it comes to business processes. So, how do we leverage agents in the best way? We shouldn't just do an agent to do a process just because it can, but how does it add value to our day-to-day workflows? We see agents a lot, in our day-to-day tasks, things like Copilot. We have things like the research agent, which is really good for that deep dive investigation. But we're going to see a lot more different use cases evolving as businesses. And I think more of them will be more functional aligned. So thinking about how agents are aligned to HR processes and how agents are aligned to finance processes, etc. So I think there's a big, shift in the mindset of let's not just think about agents as a buzzword, but how does it really embed into our business processes and complement our day-to-day roles? So I think, just to summarize, that's the big thing, right? How do we remove that repetitive, that mundane tasks, and really allow us to focus on things that we do love and enjoy on a day-to-day basis? How about yourself, Mike?
So I'm going to come at this from a place that's at once more technical, but also a little bit further out, because I see the frontier agent, the idea of frontier company in two ways. So I spend a lot of my time building bespoke agentic processes for our clients. So these aren't necessarily things that you can just like conjure up in Copilot. These are things that you have to get into like reasonably deep tech to be able to do. And those things are difficult. They are hard to do, and they are hard to tame the AI models that we have to take those autonomous actions that make an agentic workflow, because those models are so new and they are so at times capricious in the things that they want to do. In terms of gearing up for being frontier firms and a frontier industry, what Microsoft have done in this Ignite is they have given developers like myself a bigger toolkit, or at least a more grown-up toolkit. So they have brought into the enterprise space the agentic framework. So last year, they announced Semantic Kernel, and they announced Azure AI Foundry, and they announced a whole bunch of other things that just like flew out into the industry and caused kind of chaos everywhere as everybody built lots and lots of things in lots and lots of different tools. What we've seen this year is a real unification of the developer experience. So they have brought back into what they've now called Microsoft Foundry. So they've changed the name again. We had Azure AI Services. We then had Azure AI Foundry. Now we have Microsoft Foundry. It's the same thing. Everybody relax. It's just changed its name. But what we have inside that is we have significantly more, as Rajan said, governance. And Chris, this is your world as well. We now have a way to set up agents using Microsoft frameworks under the Agent 365 program, and we can monitor what they do significantly more easily than we could 6 months ago. So we can take these objects and we can throw them into business processes, and we can evaluate them, we can monitor them, we can do wild stuff like red teaming them, we can put guardrails on them, we can apply Purview and Sentinel over the top of what they do, because they now have an Entra 365 object. Sorry, they're called Agent 365. They're getting an Entra ID, these agents, so that they can be properly managed in your estate in terms of the permissions and things that they can do. So you've got that side of it. You've got these developer tools that Microsoft has built to make building agents better. But this is equally a projection that the AI models are going to get better. Because at the end of the day, agents, at the moment, we are in a reality where they are not magic. They're not yet human equivalent objects. They're not yet at the point where you can just summon up in Copilot like a whole data scientist. You can't do that. That's not a thing that you can do. What you can do is you can isolate individual business processes, and you can isolate particular needs that have foundations on, and you can take your agent and you can apply it to that. So you can have like an email monitoring agent, you can have an Excel monitoring agent. They are smaller in scope than the big, if you look at Microsoft's 3-level program for getting to frontier firms, we kick off right now where we are, which is humans with assistants. And then they see very, very quickly that we're going to have human agent teams. And then the big projection they have is that we will have human oversight, as Rajan said, of many, many agents. And actually you'll spend your time, painting and doing what you actually want to do with your life, or whatever it happens to be. That is a projection that the models will get better.
Yes. That's a terrifying thought that we're all just going to go off and start painting. But
Lego. We can do Lego.
Yes.
We do have something in the chat, which I think is important, if I can butt in. So, Hannah VF has asked, in terms of all of these things, what are the biggest challenges to people adopting the frameworks and the technologies that have come in from Ignite? So whether it's technical, cultural, or operational, we've got all these fancy tools. What are the biggest barriers in firms that you or I are familiar with?
So just give my take and sort of just trying to play back some of what the three of you have said before we jump into the technology. But I think there's this balance point that Microsoft are trying to seek to help with, which is driving and enabling innovation without stifling it at the same time. And we see quite often the organizations like Microsoft and others where they sort of set out this, you talked about those 3 stages, Mike. So the one on the far right, the furthest one away, to some degree, people can get their head around. It's the driverless cars, it's the robots, it's the proper futuristic stuff. And they're sort of okay with, well, I've got Copilot that can write up my meeting notes. There's a huge chasm between those two things. People may have heard of Oakland talk about the imagination gap as one of our sort of phrases that talk about this. And I think one of the challenges that will exist to answer Hannah's question will be, how do I take the first step beyond the sort of really basic, simpler stuff? Now, I think some of that is helped by Microsoft constantly lowering the barrier to entry to some of those capabilities. So some of the more modern stuff now just comes in Office. To your point, Mike, there's Excel agents that will just they're there today. If you've got the right license, you've probably already got them. But how do organizations build a sensible but exciting roadmap that gets them some way along their version of that frontier journey? I think we've all said it in slightly different ways that the frontier firm concept will be very different in reality for each organization. So I think whether it's technical, cultural, operation, I think it's all of those things. But how do you build a roadmap that is sensible, attainable, exciting? Because actually part of this is keeping people excited as well, because the change is so dramatic and so quick. Like, how do you stop them getting bored of it and almost becoming fatigued by it? I think is going to be part of the challenge with all of this.
I think if I could just jump in a minute, I think one of the biggest challenges, one you hear like on the street, talking to your friends and family, is how is this going to change the job market? How's it going to change our career plans, right? So if we've got all these agents coming into enterprises, what jobs are there going to be in 10 years, 5 years? And how do we help our clients just adapt people's roles? People don't get scared. People aren't going to lose their jobs. It's just an adaptation of people's roles. And even, my mum uses it, so
yes,
people are starting to use it everywhere. So we just need to adapt.
So if we can, let's try and pick up on the technology, the actual announcements during the week in terms of, you've heard all 3 of Rajan, Mike and Chris talk about Office 365, Enter ID, IQ across 3 different planes. So let's try and jump into that a bit. And there was a ton of releases. Some were minor, given that there's been lots of releases prior to that during the year. Some of them were a bit more substantial. Some of them, as Mike said, were simply a rebrand. If you're a bit more cynical, but what does it actually mean to all of you? And I think what we've tried to do, or hopefully trying to do today, is whilst there were hundreds of releases, we want to provide that update to those, or interpretation of those, through Oakland's lens of everything data. So there'll be some things that we don't touch on today. We've got this wouldn't be an hour long if we tried to do that. It'd be the whole afternoon probably. But what we're trying to do is look at it through the lens of everything data. So how it aligns with what we believe are the cornerstones of good data practice. You've heard all three actually allude to some of those things already. But how do we do that by looking towards the future, and a future that has AI, let's say, by your side for now, to Chris's point around jobs. And let's try and then summarize our take on Ignite, particularly around our world, which is things like platforms, data management and governance, and then I think the agentic cherry on the top, which is Mike's world. So Rajan, let's come to you first, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Sort of give us a bit of a deeper dive on the actual technology releases that caught your eye, and why do they matter from a data perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk mainly about the world of Fabric, which is Microsoft's unified analytics platform, shall we say. I think the first thing that I want to call out is we had Ignite, obviously, in November, but the pace of change in Fabric is huge. Just a couple of months ago, there was FabCon. We got a massive download of new updates, new features, etc. within that product set. And all of a sudden, a couple of months again, we get huge announcements. So, pace of change within the world of Fabric is massive. So I'm going to keep it really short, I think, in terms of what are my three key features or hero features that I want to call out. First one you've already touched on is this whole concept of IQ. And IQ lives within the Microsoft ecosystem within Fabric. I'm sure, Chris and Mike will talk about IQ within their respective domains as well. But within Fabric, we have this concept now of Fabric IQ, which is essentially providing a layer of intelligence, or unified intelligence, shall we say, to all those data products, those insights that we have within the Fabric layer. So Fabric IQ is made up of a few different components. Some of them exist today, so things like your semantic models and your data agents, but it also introduces a couple of new things as well. So we have this concept now of ontology maps. And essentially what this is it allows us to draw business processes, or business meanings rather, to the relationships within that data. So how is that data connect? Traditionally, when we're modeling data, we look at it in the lens of, one to many, for example, or, what is the cardinality of that relationship? Now what we're doing is we're starting to add business context to those relationships. So for example, a customer buys a product through a sale, for example. So it's adding that context within that ontology map. And essentially what that's going to do then is fuel lots of different components within the Fabric platform. So data agents is one of them. And if you're not familiar with data agents, that is where essentially you can have an agentic layer, a conversation layer on top of your data, and start to ask and engage questions and a conversation with your data within Fabric. There's also this new concept, I guess, of operations agents, which is the second part that I want to talk about, with the agent landscape within Fabric. Operations agents, for me, is the key standout feature within the announcements. And the reason for that is because of my background within the Power BI world and the BI landscape. We've always talked to our clients around how do we create actionable insights within Power BI reports? How do we enable data-driven decision making? And operations agents essentially allows us to close that loop now in an automated way. Yes, we've done things like Power Automate flows. We've added additional components within our architectures to enable that for users. We can use adaptive calls in Teams to prompt users. But really what operations agents do is it allows us to automate that full workflow all within that single unified platform that is Fabric. So we're not just talking about Fabric as a unified data platform now, we're talking about it as a unified intelligence platform. And coming back to one of the questions you mentioned as well, I think from Hannah, what is the challenge in terms of adopting this? I think Microsoft is very good at embedding these features within your existing workflows. So for example, we have agents that come out of Fabric and live within your Copilot, within your teams, etc. So it's not adding to the burden for individual users to go in and find where all of these agents are. It's they're all in a central place for you to consume really easily. So you can get your data agents, your operations agents, etc., all within your Copilot M365, for example. Just elaborating though a bit more on those operations agents, what does that actually mean in terms of actionable insight? Essentially, what they're doing is it's monitoring your data estate in real time, let's say, and providing those actionable suggestions back to the user. And this is where that human in the loop, the idea that humans live alongside agents, come back to in that frontier firm concept. As a user, for example, and we saw this in the demo, the operations agent will send you a Teams message and suggest an action. For example, I think it was, let's send a promo code to this customer because it looks like they may be leaving, for example. So it's all about creating that data-driven insight and that data-driven action. So Fabric IQ is huge, adding to that ontology map and that context and that intelligence to your data estate. Operations agents and data agents, obviously huge. The other part of the agents as well that I've not called out, not necessarily a new feature, but just trying a spotlight, is asking questions about your data within the concept of Power BI. We talk about dashboards, Power BI reports, but agents is really a new concept when it comes to delivering data insights within the Fabric ecosystem through all of these different components. And then the third one, which I think is the most interesting for me as an architect, is the integration with Databricks and where Microsoft see that moving in the future. I've been in a lot of client conversations over the past few months, and it's all about, should we choose Fabric? Should we choose Databricks? Where does it fit within our ecosystem? And it's not always the case of one or the other. Sometimes it's about, how do they fit side by side together? And some of the announcements that we've seen within Ignite is around how do they integrate, more closely together. There are some integrations that are already in place within Fabric platform. For example, we can use a concept within Fabric called mirroring, which allows us to mirror your Unity catalog in Databricks and have that accessible through the Fabric platform. Microsoft and Databricks are now taking that, not just one step further, but several steps further. So what they announced at Ignite is essentially support for the opposite way, where you can get your OneLake data in Fabric within Databricks, and that's super cool. But I think the next level, and this is going to be coming soon, so this is something that they've announced that will come soon, and we'll hear more about it in 2026, is the ability to use Databricks and have it backed by OneLake. So rather than provisioning your separate storage, Databricks can now support natively OneLake, and that will be coming in the future. So I think from an architect's point of view, it's reframing and rethinking about how do some of these more, like PaaS-style solutions sit alongside your SaaS-style solutions, and thinking about new ways of working and how that integration works, more specifically for the different use cases. Where does Fabric fit in an enterprise versus Databricks? How do they work better together for our clients? So I think that's a key space to watch over the coming few months. But yeah, they're my top announcements. So yeah,
it's funny you say that, Rajan. I think I was pleasantly surprised that although you're there to listen about Microsoft, the Microsoft ecosystem, everything that sort of sits within that container, let's say, one of their big messages through a number of sessions I sat was interoperability, sort of a recognition and a nod to, as you say, particularly big, complex organizations will have multiples of these technology solutions, whether it's Databricks, Snowflake, SAP, who we come across quite a lot in some of our clients. It felt like they've done more work to just accept and recognize that interoperability is a necessary evil almost. So how do we simplify that rather than just assume, just bring everything into the Microsoft land? Felt like a better answer.
Yeah, I've talked about Databricks a lot here, but equally there were huge announcements on the Snowflake side and on the SAP side and other platforms. That concept of database mirroring is very unique in Fabric, and that's, I guess, the USP of that OneLake component. All of your organization's data can live within OneLake and then be supported by all those Fabric workloads. And we're seeing the next level of that now with some of the major platforms within that data and AI landscape, being able to integrate that more fully within the Fabric platform.
Good. I'm going to hand over to Chris. I will remind everybody, keep having a think about any questions, so we don't have to keep referring back to Hannah's question as the only one. So please do add them as we go. We'll try and answer them as we go as well. So, Chris, I'll sort of throw it over to you in terms of, so we go from Rajan's perception and his world of looking at the platform and how we build that better foundational capability, if you like, in the platform constructs. now we've got to think about the data within it from a protection perspective. But I think, to your point at the start, it felt like there's a reality check for a lot of people, particularly with things in the news of late, that the management, security, control of your data has now become a definite strategic imperative.
Yeah, and my role at the start of the Ignite was, let's look at Purview, right? Let's try and find some sessions where they mention Purview. And I'm searching through the schedule, no Purview. Well, there was 2 or 3 sessions around Purview. So, okay, why? Why is there nothing on Purview? And what it seemed to be was there was something bigger to announce, right? There was this concept of Agent 365 to announce, which is all around the agents that we've spoken about today, finally getting this Entra ID, the elusive Entra ID, which allows us to control them like they're humans. So essentially, the way that we give control and access to data and access to different licensing at the moment with humans, we can now do that, or in the future when this is released fully, we can do that with agents as well, which is really cool. It just gives us that extra bit of control. So there's kind of 5 elements to Agent 365. There's a registry element, so you get to view all the different agents that are within your enterprise, within your tenant, and you get to see them. And then within that, you can then give access control, like I've said. So you can give any RBAC controls that you can give currently, you'd be able to do with agents. And then there's this visualization or visibility angle. So think of this as kind of like the Power BI view of agents. So you can see all the different agents, who has access to those agents, what access those agents have to data, and how they're interacting with the data, and the different questions that are being asked of those agents as well. Interoperability is a bit of a horrible word to say, but all that essentially means is the fourth pillar is that agents will start to learn how you do your job, which is a little bit creepy, but they'll start to understand, okay, I'm having a conversation with Andy. Andy's asked me to do this thing. I need to go talk to Mike about that. They will start to understand the flow of information through your enterprise. And then when you ask the agent a question, it'll already predict that, and it'll go and read the messages between Andy, it'll read my messages between Mike, and it'll get that information to the forefront for you. But then the most important thing about all of this, and with the Agent 365 concept, is security. So we start to see these agents registered within Purview, particularly Purview for data security, and also in Purview for data governance as well. So we'll start to see improvements as we go on. Product updates will then bring agent visibility to those different products. And why does it matter? It's back to that first concept of there's going to be 1.3 billion agents. We need to control them somehow. So this is kind of Microsoft's first step to answer that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I did hear quite a few sort of side conversations whilst there about like agent sprawl. You referred to like shadow IT. I think there'll be shadow AI, and then there'll be shadow agents, which sounds like a James Bond film or something. Exactly, yeah. But it's really interesting that as the concept, or as people have tried to land the concept that agents are your workforce of the future, it's felt like it's taken people quite a while to catch up with the concept of, well, let's say I'm going to have 1,000 agents. You wouldn't go out there tomorrow and recruit 1,000 people without the relevant training, controls, policies, etc. in place to make sure that those 1,000 physical people do what you need them to do, when you need them to do it, in the way you need them to do it. But for a while, we've just assumed I can sort of get agents and off they go and we'll be all right. So it did feel like that was it was almost underplayed, but actually incredibly important part of the updates to recognize, we're going to need a way to manage, and I don't want to say control in a negative sense, but yes, control agents so that it's still a human-led thing.
Yeah. And let's be clear, it's happening right now.
Yeah.
If you have a Copilot M365 license, you can create agents. I have created agents. So but they are not currently registered. People can't currently see them. So that's what it's all about. So all those agents that we are creating right now, let's get them registered. Let's get visibility over them, what they're accessing.
Yeah. And so are there any other sort of, I guess, gotchas do you think with that might again, it all sounds super simple. Like exactly you say with Office 365, I've now got, I could go away and start building an agent. Nobody wants that.
Yep.
But any of us could. Any of the people in organizations out there watching this can go out and pretty much build an agent tomorrow. The barrier to entry with that is being lowered all the time. Yeah, that has its pros and cons. But from your perspective, given what you just updated, are there any other challenges or gotchas with that people need to be mindful of, do you think?
So I suppose if we pick price to begin with, we don't know. We don't know the cost of this.
Yeah,
I've seen a couple of LinkedIn posts that are saying that we can start to see that A365 as a SKU is appearing in some of the Microsoft documentation. So there's definitely going to be a cost to this. And is that a user cost? Is it a per agent cost to monitor them?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have an enterprise license where we can monitor 1,000 agents and then the rest go unregistered? We just don't know yet because it's still private preview with Microsoft users at the moment. So it's kind of like that open area of we just don't know how this is going to work at the moment.
Anything that anybody else should? Because for me, I talk to a lot of people, and there's both an excitement and a fear.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you would say that brings, all the stuff you talked about, does that bring anything from your perspective to allay those fears? You talked about price. I think that is an obvious one where those who are aware enough go, hang on a minute, we're about to recruit a load of people. Has anybody signed off the recruitment costs or the employee costs or the running costs? It's a very similar thing. So I think people are getting their head into that could get quite expensive quite quickly. But is there anything else for people to watch out for in terms of that, or be aware of? Like, don't worry, that helps with the fear factor.
Well, I think it will give us that register of agents, right? But I suppose what we don't know yet is, do they automatically get registered? Can we still have the idea of Copilot licenses are given out and people can just keep generating their own Copilot agents?
Yes.
We don't know that yet. Let's see where that goes. And also, I think it just highlights the need for AI governance, right? Proper AI governance around what we're doing in our enterprises.
Just one quick thing, which actually wasn't part of our pre-chat, but I'd be interested in any of your perspectives, actually, just before we move on to sort of the last section. But one of the things I did hear people talk about was the decommissioning of agents, let's say. So to your point on, I'm about to spin up however many agents, there's the cost of that, there's the security of the data that they use, etc. One thing that did come up while I was there that I heard a few people muttering about was, how do you, and it's probably, it's maybe a less a Microsoft thing, but just an organizational concept of like, how do we think about when and how we decommission an agent? So in the same way, an employee might leave, or you might have to remove an employee because they're not doing the job effectively. A lot of people are saying, given the pace of change, they can imagine scenarios where you build an agent today and a new agent that can do that job better might appear in 3, 6, 12 months' time. And they were lamenting, a bit like you've just said, yes, they get an enter ID, but how do I start to monitor? I need to replace agent 125 with agent 257 because 257 can do 125's job better, type thing. Now, it might be, from your perspective, that's something we've still got to figure out. But some of this,
we've got the framework for that, if I can get in. Yeah. So in terms of the developer tools, and this is something, if we have time, I can talk about ad infinitum, some of the new things that came out for AI engineers at Ignite. But one of the main ones was a streamlining of a couple of the processes that for a long time have been quite annoying, which is fine-tuning large language models. And that is a whole bag of snakes that we're going to package up, push over there, and then leave alone. That is not for today, but it was fine-tuning large language models and also the framework for evaluation of those models. And they have introduced a new set of tools that will allow you to basically benchmark your agents against known tests. And you can pass or fail them, or you can give partial credit, which is the new kind of like feature that they have added to these testing harnesses is the idea that you can give your agents partial credit in an answer. So it's not just a pass-fail, it is a sort of like broad assessment of the skills of the agent that you have. And so to go back to your example, and this goes into something that Nathan was talking about in the chat, in terms of stuff to focus on, because this landscape changes so rapidly, the things to focus on are operational capability and the underlying foundations. Underlying foundations, Chris and Rajan can talk to. They're really, really good. But in terms of the operational capability of agents, what you really, really have to do is you have to make sure that your agent does the things in your business that you want it to do, and only those things. And some of the things that we have talked about today in terms of Entra ID and the limitation of authentication mean that those agents will only have as much power as you give them, because of the enhancement as well of the oversight that you're going to get of these objects. But also, with this new evaluation harness, you are going to be able to A/B test. And there are a whole bunch of new cool features as well, like group chats in Teams and shoving out MCP servers into Teams and A/B testing in Teams, I think. I have to go and look up where I saw that, but I think it's A/B testing in Teams, where if you are a central agent factory and you are throwing agents out into your business, you can give some people one of them and some people the other one, and evaluate the work that those two things do and assess how they work over time. And then you can, in the nicest possible way, retire the one that isn't doing so well.
Yes.
That level of control and that sort of like philosophical underpinning is the main stuff, apart from the nerdy malarkey that I can get excited about. Like, hey, Anthropic's in AI Foundry now. Woohoo. But there's nerdy stuff like that, which will improve the experience of developers. But then in terms of what the actual business will see, that's Chris and Rajan's land of control, capability, permission structures, evaluations, guardrails, those things that are being applied to the enterprise ability of Copilot and the other agents that get built.
And I think what you've just touched on is, I think, answering part of John's question. So one of the questions is, if we are empowering agents to take actions in operational systems, how long is it going to take to build trust? Now, you do that through some of the testing stuff you've talked about, I think, helping to prove or disprove the answers and how that interfaces back into business process. But also, I think one of the things that I was particularly interested to see, and Mike, you've just talked about it there, I think, is a lot of these tools you're talking about, the way it was presented, certainly in the event, and if you're watching any of the streaming, is a lot of it's become far more easy to interact with and visual. So for me, one of the areas we build, or we need to look at to build trust, is exposing some of that back to the business. So I think, Mike, your explanation of how we manage the retirement of agents, that's maybe a better word. I think we need to expose that to the business and go, don't worry, we've retired that agent because it's not good enough or it's been superseded. And actually that builds trust with people that we are managing these agents. There is a process and a framework and guide rails to know where to use them, whether they're being used in the right way, how we improve them. Because I think to many people I talk to, it's still a black art, it's still hidden, it's still, well, how did you actually do that? So, and I think some of that also, in my opinion, would help with, where is it? Sharon Richardson's statement of culture and maturity of human skills with AI is also about that, teaching people what they can and can't do, how you use them, how you don't use them, how you turn them off and turn them on, so to speak. So there are a few other questions. I'm going to try and touch on a few of them, and feel free to pick them out, any of you really. But so I think we've touched on John's. I think, as Tasmin rightly says, a very specific question, but did they mention anything specific about mirroring being able to accommodate Snowflake views soon, not just tables?
Yeah, very specific question. We probably have to take that one away, right? So there's definitely a lot more on interpretability, as you mentioned, Andy, with Snowflake and Fabric within the OneLake platform, using open formats, etc. View specifically, probably need to take a look at that one in the documentation.
Cool. Yeah. So one thing we were going to say is if there are questions today that are buried deep in some of the material, as you can imagine, there's everything from the Book of News, which was a completely new thing to me this year, but from that to individual documentation that supported every one of the hundreds of talks and seminars, we will do some of the digging for you and try and answer them if we can't today. I think we've touched briefly on John's, and then Tim Hayward asks a question to all of us. But in your opinion, our opinion, is the Microsoft AI data strategy clear to an extent? The Microsoft vision and strategy can be clearly articulated to clients.
Can I hijack this question to talk about something I wanted
question. Yes,
wanted to mention, right? Which is so yes and no, right? Tim, thanks. Woohoo! Right, way to put us in a corner. But so Microsoft's vision is the 3-stage to being a frontier a firm. They would like everybody to be a frontier firm, whether you're a mom and pop, 7-Eleven shop, or you are McKinsey Consulting. You're a frontier firm now. Well done. And that will be in a 3-stage process, from the human with AI assistance, which is kind of where we are now, through to increased agentic capability, all the way to humans overseeing AI actually doing the work while, we take the big strategic decisions. That is their strategy. That is the plan. As far as I'm concerned as an AI engineer, that's where we're going. That's what we're trying to achieve here. In order to do that, you need a whole bunch of things to be true. And you need a whole bunch of people, to quote Anne Comedian, you need a whole bunch of people to get real cool with a whole load of stuff really quick, which is what John is talking about in terms of trusting the AI. And so we need to build that trust with the artificial intelligence that is there. If we are going to do this frontier thing, people need to trust these bots. They need to trust the processes that happen. In order to do that, the AI has to have some grounding in truth, because it is not the case in business that 95% is good enough. If you are relying on this thing, if you're using what do they call it? Work IQ. If you're using Work IQ or you're using Fabric IQ, if it's only right 95% of the time, that's kind of not good enough. It needs to be really, really good. And so we need the extra grounding, which is where one of the final of the IQs come in, which is Foundry IQ. And the hope with Foundry IQ is that we will be able to ground the responses of agents in fact. So Foundry IQ, to be hand wavy for 45 seconds, is an extra way of adding important tools to agents which will allow them to search through knowledge bases to basically fact check their answers. Again, reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want the hairy, gory details of exactly how Azure AI Search is set up to do that. Let's talk about that another time. But we're basically trying to ground things in fact. It remains to be seen whether this will work. We're going to have to battle test these over the next 6 to 12 months to understand whether Foundry IQ is as robust as Microsoft claim it is. I've seen the benchmarks. I've seen the demos. They look great. But what we're going to have to do is really beat Foundry IQ with sticks and make sure that it does the things that we claim it does, which is produce factual, accurate responses from agents at scale to help people with their jobs. If any of that fails, if any of that sentence fails, then we're not going to be building the trust, and that strategy that Microsoft have falls apart.
Any additions or challenges to that from Chris or Rajan?
Yeah, I would just add, I think it's the last part of the question is, how do we articulate this to clients? And it's the same with any wave of technology, right? What is the readiness and the maturity in the organization? It's very easy, as with a lot of Microsoft technologies. I've seen it in Fabric, I've seen it in Power BI, I've seen it in Copilot. You just click a button, users have access, you can do what you want with it, right? But just because you can be doing it doesn't mean you should be doing it, right? And what is the readiness? Are firms AI ready? Are they agent ready? And it comes back to, I guess, that common theme that we always see, data in, so bad data in equals bad data out, right? Good data in could equal good data out, but there's a lot of modeling and everything that goes in between that. So, have those foundations being built for you to enable a clear AI and agentic roadmap for the organization. What's our data estate look like? Do we have those correct data models in place? How are files and systems and processes being organized within the organization? Are they centrally managed? Again, what Chris mentioned around the grey IT side, where are those pockets of deviation going to exist within the business, and really assessing the maturity of the organization. Because yes, organizations will have lots of different use cases, but how can we fuel those use cases in the most scalable and successful way? And it all goes back to what we spoke about earlier about the trust, right? Without having those foundations, the trust level is going to be super low, adoption is going to be super low, and you're going to go through this change management wave, which is going to fail. So having those foundations in place is going to enable trust, which is going to enable that change management process to be successful. So I think that's a really key point. What is the readiness of the organization? And that's how we communicate the strategy and the roadmap to our clients.
Chris,
I
anything
honestly
to add?
think this is almost the first time that Microsoft have had a clear strategy on data and AI, almost, if I'm allowed to say that. But if you think back to kind of like the SQL Server, SQL Warehouse, Synapse days, it was just kind of just building on what they had, and then suddenly Synapse became Fabric and said, "What's going on? Why does it all keep changing? Why do we have to ditch Synapse and then go Fabric?" And it all seems to now be coming together around this idea of the frontier firm, and the AI essentially is driving all these different things to work together. So, like both Mike and Rajan have said, that it needs to work. But I think it was quite clear what for me what I was listening to is just we just need to work, and it's that classic thing. Now we're waiting for the products that they've announced to be released. I mean, okay, how long do we wait for them to be released?
I think for me, just to provide a slightly different, sort of less technical perspective, I guess, is it clear to some extent? Is it easy, therefore, to articulate that to a client? I think for me, why do you want to articulate it to a client? It's a bit so what. One of my takeaways was it was very much an aspirational, ambitious sort of statement. It's out there, and yes, you can strive towards it. But for me, it's quite easy to articulate it if a company's already got a well-articulated business strategy. Because why are you doing it? Why are you adopting or seeking to adopt AI if you don't know what you're trying to achieve as a business? And therefore, AI has to fit or sit behind that. And equally, a data strategy needs to do the same rather than be independent, or like, why am I doing things with data if I can't articulate where we're trying to get to as a business? So the one thing I think that's missing with a lot of the frontier firm stuff is a much clearer acknowledgement of helping an organization to understand their own business strategy, and then how the frontier concept underpins that or helps enable that or makes it go faster, for example. And a lot of organizations we come across, the frontier thing is great, but they need help, or they need support, or they need time to come up with the first half of that, which is their own business strategy, and then look at where frontier fits in. So I think for me, a lot of it is really compelling. A lot of it is really quite useful, actually, but it will come down to being, your version of frontier versus your version of frontier versus your version of frontier, because it would depend on what you're trying to do as a business. So I'd agree with Chris, Tim, to hopefully answer the first half of your question, that it's probably the clearest version I've seen. It does seek to, in a slightly better way, I think, bring together everything that Microsoft offers, particularly in the sort of data and AI space. The articulation of that back to an end client or another organization comes back to what are they trying to do, I think. Just super quickly, we've got a couple of minutes left. Joel asked a similar question to Tasmin with regards to SQL or SQL tables instead of Snowflake. I'm guessing we'll take that one away and provide an answer back to the audience outside of this, unless Rajan's going to correct me and answer it very quickly.
Yeah, I wasn't sure it was a question, or maybe Joel's answering Tasmin's question for us. But yeah, we'll take it away.
Cool. And I think we've managed to cover pretty much everything else within the chat, and hopefully we remained audible through the whole of that. But with a couple of minutes to go, if there are any other questions, please feel free to add them in. But I just wanted to thank Chris, Rajan, and Mike not only for ruining their sleeping patterns the other week and staying up late and managing to cover a hell of a lot of ground virtually throughout that period and seeing what Microsoft had to say, but also I think more importantly for everybody who's listened today, being able to play that back in a way that means something to the audience and translates that in a way that people can use. There'll be more of these coming up over time in terms of Oakland's sort of take on the technology space and the different vendors out there. So please watch out for that. And thank you very much for all tuning in. There are multiple bits of content, points of view, white papers that underpin a lot of what we've spoken about today. If you want to know any more or you have any specific questions that we didn't get a chance to either answer or talk about today, then please do drop us a note. And I think the slide has just been put up with our contact details on the screen. So have a wonderful festive weekend, everyone who's tuned in today, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Cheers.
You guys take care.